Welcome, everyone, to the first Dean's Invited Lecture Series for this semester. It's a real thrill to kick this one off with Maryana Iskander, a Yale trustee and CEO of Wikimedia Foundation. She's a graduate of Yale Law School from 2003, correct, okay. And her presence here really resonates with me personally. I think the way we break down barriers to obstacles to education and higher ed and technology to the world community is sort of part of what we feel we're trying to do here as well as part of engineering. And I'm just thrilled to have her here with us today for this conversation. We thought about different ways to do it, and we decided that, we're easy, approachable people, and we should just sort of open it up to questions early. But I do want to tee up a few things I think we'd all be really interested in just kind of hearing about your personal journey, given my succinct introduction, and get a little more color around your journey to this point in your career in life.
Well, first, I tried to meet most of you, but didn't get around to everybody. So thank you for making time to come and be here. We're in a world where actually our most limited resource is our time. So how we choose to spend it matters a lot. And I really appreciate all of you coming. And a big thank you to you for inviting us. And I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the Wikimedia Foundation. It's the nonprofit that operates Wikipedia. But I thought first I would just tell you a little bit about my journey. And our goal in the conversation is to kind of put out topics we can talk about, because we're going to get to Q&A pretty quickly. As Dean Brock said, my name's Maryana Iskander. I was born in Egypt, in Cairo. My parents immigrated to the US when I was at a very young age. And I do talk a lot about my experience as an immigrant to the US at a time that feels very different than I think a lot of immigrant experiences today and a lot of what we see. And I had the benefit of parents who really valued the role of education, and I sort of was told, like, work hard, do well in school, and America will open up doors. And that has definitely been true for me. And again, I worry about that as we look at what's happening with migration around the world. I mostly grew up in Texas, in a small town called Round Rock outside of Austin, and made a decision to start my educational career at Rice University. And then I studied in the UK. I had a very brief stint in management consulting. It was not for me. Happy to talk about that. And then found my way to Yale Law School in order to learn things that did not involve practicing law, which I never did. And one of the things that I wanted to offer as a reflection is that for me personally, and I think it's even more true today than when I was in law school, is that the stuff you're learning is going to change very quickly. And I hope that what you do as you're in educational institutions is really learn how to learn new stuff, because you're going to have to keep learning new stuff a lot. And I had the great benefit of having that opportunity at Yale. Like, how do I learn to learn? And I chose my undergraduate major on that basis. I was sharing with some of the students I met earlier. I picked the department that had the teachers that got the awards for being the best teachers. And I went and learned from them because they were the best teachers in the university. And that was an important way to begin what I hope has been my life journey of, like, how do I just keep learning to learn and being curious? And what that's led to is a career across stuff that's so different and completely unrelated to each other. I started after the brief stint in management consulting. I graduated from law school, spent a year clerking on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals based in Chicago. That experience confirmed that I did not want to practice law, so it was really valuable. And then ended up going back to Rice to work for the incoming new president, and so learned a little bit about how complex universities are. And they're big organizations with lots of stakeholders, as you know. I then joined Planned Parenthood, which is a reproductive health and advocacy organization that focuses on women's reproductive health. And then I moved to South Africa, and I spent 10 years scaling a youth employment accelerator. South Africa has the highest rate of youth unemployment in the world. As global economic cycles improve, youth unemployment does not improve, and it's likely that about 60% of young people in South Africa will never work. And so trying to figure out sustainable solutions to that very, very deep generational problem occupied a lot of my time for the last 10 years. And then 2 years ago, I joined the Wikimedia Foundation. Many of you may use Wikipedia, but my experience in the last 2 years is that most people don't understand a lot about how it's set up and how it works. And so I hope to share a little bit of that with you today. And then we can maybe talk about some of the things that might interest you about how Wikipedia is thinking about big questions in the world.
That's great, thanks. I'm particularly interested in how you see and I think a lot of us have been talking a lot about what this latest wave of tools coming out of the AI space, probably trained largely on your data.
Yep.
How you see your role as a leader of this organization, and really this community is somehow how I think of it, figuring into that conversation and where you would direct our students in terms of how, if they want to get involved in being advocates for the sort of openness and freedom of that information, what they should do.
Great. Well, I never assume that we all have the same baseline of information, so maybe I'll just tell you a little bit about how Wikipedia is set up and operates, and then get to some of the questions about generative AI. So Wikipedia was started in 2001 with a group of volunteers that had the premise of how to create an online encyclopedia. It very quickly became a nonprofit model that is true to this day, doesn't have advertising, really relies on the small donations of somewhere between 8 and 10 million people a year across lots and lots of countries. And I think that gift to the commons and the idea that this is a public good has been a really important part of the mission for a very long time. And to run a nonprofit with limited resources that sees the same level of traffic as Facebook and YouTube and many of the other large sites that is an interesting question, because Wikipedia tends to be in the top 10 globally, but in some countries, it could be the most visited website, and we operate that with about 700 people, lots of engineers, but lots of other types of people as well, lots of lawyers around litigation and regulatory issues. And the reason that we can do that with so few people is because the content of Wikipedia is written by volunteers in 332 languages in literally every corner of the world, who have been at that enterprise, as I said, longer than the organization's been in existence. The website gets somewhere close to 15 billion visits a month, so that's every person in the world twice per month. About 345 edits a minute if somebody is editing something. And for most tech organizations, being able to translate your product into like 8 or 10 languages is a feat. So 332 languages is a lot of multilingualism that I want to talk a little bit about, because I think most of us live in the English internet, and frankly, there's a lot of other language internets that matter in the world that large language models don't respond to as well, and things that I think are important to think about. There have been a few other things that I've learned because I came in new to it's called Wikimedia because we operate many other projects in addition to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is the one probably the best. We have Wikimedia Commons, which is the repository of free licensed photographs and images that are available to be reused. It's about 75 million images. We have a project called Wikidata. I was learning about the computer science department that's working with them now that is essentially a large open database. And there are so many things when you look at technology trends in the world today that Wikipedia has done the opposite of. We collect no data about who comes. We don't know what articles you look at. We dump the data. We don't keep our data in the cloud. We run our own servers. We do all these things that seem very unusual when you think about technology trends and the direction that things are heading. And I am, I think, here to deliver some message that it's working. And I have confidence it will continue to work. But I do think that trying to understand how to get more people interested in this project and more interested in the commitments of an open internet and more interested in the right incentives for how knowledge is created and knowledge is shared is really, really important. The two things that I'll say about the world of generative AI is that, unsurprisingly, because really smart people find their way to Wikipedia, has been my experience having met lots and lots of volunteers, is that bots in one form or another have been part of Wikipedia since the very beginning. They were used in the very, very early days to kind of run scripts on census data and then pre-populate articles that were related to those kinds of locations. That has become much more sophisticated now. The foundation, the organization that I work at, has had a machine learning team in place since 2017. Every model, every algorithm, everything we do is in the open. Our head of machine learning codes in a live stream that anybody can watch, and if you want to, he's super cool if you want to watch him. Every mistake is printed somewhere. Like, it's a proof point that that is how we can do things if we wanted to. And so I think that that's been a really important principle. And then the second, to your point, is that there was a paper that was published a few months ago that said that in pretty much most of the large language models, the single largest training data set is Wikipedia. It's really hard to find a data set that is as organized and as meticulous and everything is in the right places. And so it's been highly used by a lot of the large language models. Because we are driven by our volunteers and our community, a lot of the ways we think about what to do about that, questions of attribution, questions of who gets the benefit of this, are really driven by our volunteers. And again, my experience is that they are interested in doing this to close knowledge gaps and add more free knowledge to the world, not get into the commercial game that I think we're seeing in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm. And what do you see as kind of the most important piece or role where it really does indeed require a human? You can't automate this. This is a part of knowledge curation that we have to do as you know, volunteers or kind of engaged humans in the loop.
Well, the fundamental principle of how all of this is done in Wikipedia is with humans in the loop. So machines don't really decide anything. They are directed by humans to conduct tasks, which I think is, and that's been scalable. People say, oh, that's not, it's been scalable. And so, you know, the way that Wikipedia articles are written is through citations that can get debated and that there can be a lot of back and forth. If you haven't noticed that every Wikipedia article has a second page called a talk page. It's a little button at the top next to the article, it says talk. And on that page is where you will see the record of every edit that's been made, every debate, every question, every argument about the citation. And what the evidence shows is that the more people hash it out, the more neutral everybody's point of view becomes, and that the benefit of having more people engaged in these debates, and again, I want to be careful, it's an encyclopedia, and so what we're debating are the sources and the citations. It's not a social media platform that we're debating your opinion versus my opinion. So if you take some of the issues of the day where there have been genuine debates, like the origins of the COVID virus, it's a healthy debate, and that debate is live on Wikipedia, and you can see and follow, and again, sort of all sort of out in the open. But I think to get back to the original question is that the humans kind of debate it out, and we have seen as some of our more experienced volunteers have played around with some of the new technology, there is a limit to how much of that is going to be automated and managed by chatbots.
Interesting. do you find you have specific uses for machine learning tools that you can describe to this group?
Definitely. So as I said, and again, if you're interested in any of this, the work of our machine learning team is, I'm sure my colleague Nadine can put the link up before the end of this talk, is there. And it's everything from making the lives of our editors easier. So I gave the simple example of bots that fix vandalism, in the sense of how I think most people are using it, simple tasks that can be taught and managed and don't need sort of humans to be involved. So there's a category of make editing easier, particularly for more experienced volunteers who could then spend that time doing more patrolling of pages that need eyes on them, that need human eyes on them. I would say that we've also had the benefit of how to use some of these models to identify missing knowledge. And so one of my favorite stories to tell is that in the early days of Wikipedia, it was like a competition between the Encyclopedia Britannica and do you remember the Encyclopedia Britannica? Did any of you have one in your house, the 26 volumes?
World book in my case.
That was an age-distinct question there.
Yeah.
And so it was in that competition when the online encyclopedia was being built, and so they tell a story like the latest edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica had been published, it had been shipped, and the editors went to get the 26 volumes, and it was and they realized every single thing was on Wikipedia. They had achieved capturing the knowledge, because it's kind of hard to imagine that the history of everything is in 26 volumes And so now the question becomes, what more needs to be in a living encyclopedia, in a digital encyclopedia? And we've seen the benefit actually of how to use machine learning to help us identify some of that as well.
Well, I don't want to dominate the conversation too much here, but maybe I'll tee up, opening it up here. I think our community is very engaged and interested in this kind of debate and discussion, and I would love, so one point I guess I want to affirm that I have gained appreciation for the importance of management consultants as I have entered the world of management myself.
Indeed.
So this is not,
Indeed. It's an important learning.
So if you want to come
place.
back and help out when you're a management consultant someday with engineering, let me know. But I'm interested in hearing questions about the ways that you are thinking about your careers that could be informed by this discussion, Maryana's perspective. Any thoughts or questions? Yeah.
Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, of course. Okay, yeah. The mic works. Awesome. Hi, my name's Teo. I'm an undergraduate here, and I guess I'm curious more about just the general leadership advice or question. Typically, before we're in some leadership roles, there's a lot of for me personally, the last couple of years I've seen, it's only when you're in a leadership role you're oh, this is such an obvious thing to be doing as a leader or as a CEO. Have there been any big moments like that for you now that you're sort of in this incredible leadership position that you sort of realize are tangible things you've learned from it? I guess just a very long-winded way of saying
Do you mean that I've learned in the role that I'm in?
Specifically that one, but also maybe just generally things that have now seem very obvious as active leadership strategies that maybe when you were an undergraduate or when you were doing your law degree seemed a bit fuzzier.
For sure. Well, as I said, I had a chance to spend some time with a few of you earlier, and one of the things that I reflected on in my career, and particularly I'm in a role, I was not a computer science major, and in fact, I haven't done a lot of the degree things that would fit the job that I have now. And I think that the journey that I've been on is that the power of making sure pretty much everybody around you knows more than you do about something is important to being a good leader, because what tends to happen sometimes is we can feel defensive or threatened, and the harm to an organization or institution when the leader isn't confident enough to not know the most about everything, right? I was saying, if I know more than the general counsel, it's a problem. If I know more than the finance person, it's a problem. And I think that this idea of trying to level up talent even beyond your expectations. And again, we're a nonprofit. We do not pay our engineers, what they could earn in a lot of other places. And so understanding people's motivations for why they do the work that they do. And again, my lived experience is it's not just like, it's not about the money, right? And it's not even, it's about the mission. It's like I work in an organization where like things work and things move forward and we achieve things and all of these things that kind of sound simple, but actually in a lot of places don't happen. And so trying to find ways, I think, as a leader to make sure you're very tuned into the motivations of the people around you and why they're there. And that you make sure that you are genuinely surrounding yourself with people who just are way smarter than you and finding a way to have that be a huge asset, particularly when you don't have as many resources, right? Our machine learning team is 8 people. How many people do you think at Facebook work on machine learning? So you've got to get the best of the best and then figure out how to, really support them. I don't know, for you, what do you think?
Boy, I guess sounds like, from what you're describing, this is part of your world as well. But I think that having a strong sense of empathy with the people that you work directly with and trying to understand how they see themselves in their roles relative to colleagues and you, to me, that's just vitally important because you kind of want to know when you're walking into the office in the morning, kind of, is everybody feeling good about what we're trying to do here? And sort of maintaining that sense of connection to your immediate team, to me, is really important. And yeah, absolutely, just in life in general, I think, trying to be around people that you admire and really have some sense that, I'd like to be a little more like that person. I really value that about, and it's frankly one of the great things about being at an amazing place like Yale is that you look around and whether I was an undergrad here too, and just sitting down at the dining hall and, knowing that you can't phone it in. You've got to really, bring your A game to every conversation, and if you do, you'll come away having learned a great deal. But I also think to this, what's another nice thing about working at a place like Yale and working at Wikimedia, I guess, is that there's just a sense of purposefulness and a sense that you're doing something important, and that you're conveying knowledge and that you're breaking down barriers like Maryana has described, I think is really a key. Anyway, it's important to believe in what it is that you're trying to do as a leader, and that makes it much easier to get up in the morning and get yourself to work. So, yeah, and then okay, over here.
That side, wonderful. Thank you. Hi, I'm Fabian. I'm a visiting student here, and I've had the pleasure of meeting you beforehand as well for a few seconds, since we came rather late. But hey, I have a question that expands a bit on what you've been saying before, that Wikimedia and Wikipedia do things a lot different than the big web corporations do. And it's a two-parted question. Mm-hmm. The first part is what thing, or in what point has Wikimedia, the whole structure, proven you wrong, where you were this could never work, and then no, it works perfectly. And what thing where you were told or that you thought was very important before you joined Wikipedia, where Wikimedia is no, this actually doesn't matter, here's the point why we do this?
It's a great question. There's a well-used expression in the world of Wikipedia that says that Wikipedia works in practice, but not in theory, which is, in my view, exactly right. Because you're how's this going to work? Hundreds of thousands of people in their houses by themselves are going to collaborate to write an online encyclopedia in 332 languages and self-organize in very sophisticated communities that develop policies, arbitration committees, all kinds of things that is not centrally managed in any way, and that they're going to continue to do that at scale for 20 years in the face of, every time there's a new technology innovation, it's like that's the end of Wikipedia. That happened when the voice assistants came. That was like, it hasn't happened. So there's nothing about this that actually makes sense in the way that you describe it to people, and yet here it is. And it continues to be more and more relevant, right? If those of us who are a little older, when Wikipedia first came out, it was a joke. People were like, this is not gonna, what is this? This is not gonna work. Universities were crazy that this was a terrible thing. Teachers said, do not read Wikipedia. And here we are. It's like, Wired News it's like the last best place on the internet. And in a world in which anybody can generate millions of pages of garbage on the internet, it is becoming more and more valuable as a resource. So in some sense, everything is not what you would think, and yet somehow it persists and sustains in a way that is remarkable. I think that what that means is that as an organization and as a community of volunteers, we have to be very clear-eyed about the principles that got us here and hold on to those in the face of a rapidly changing world that does create a lot of difficult questions for our organization, right? We raise most of our money through small donations. It's pitch in, give what you can. That requires you to come to our website to see the banner. My nephews, who are younger than me, they do not go to Google, type in a search, and land on a Wikipedia page. That's not how they use the internet. They usually start at YouTube and figure out, they will probably never come to a page that asks them to donate, right? And so the revenue model needs a rethink around how search patterns are changing on the internet, right? And we have to begin thinking way ahead about how to manage that, because we don't want to change the model of being independent, being a nonprofit, being kind of driven in this way. We see increasing censorship and the role of governments. They don't like what's on the Wikipedia page. They send us a notification. We always write back and say, we didn't write that, the volunteers did, so you can talk to them legitimately. But that's because, there are governments that want to see information controlled or becoming more sophisticated in how they're thinking about that. And so what are those challenges and what are those threats? Our editor population scaled very rapidly in the early years. Those people are aging now. And who are going to be the next generation of young people that are going to find this to be the hobby that they spend lots and lots of time on? How is that going to be true in parts of the world? I live in Johannesburg. Internet access is not widely accessible to everybody. It's expensive. People doing things with their discretionary time for free and not getting paid, not an easy proposition. And so a lot of these principles, I think, that got us here have to stay the same, but I do think trying to be like looking forward almost a generation to say, what are we gonna have to change to get us there, I think has been some of the kind of the second part of your question. And what I feel really proud about is that the conversations that we're having now with our volunteers are that. How do we maintain, nobody can imagine a world without Wikipedia. But we raise an annual budget every year, like every nonprofit. It's kind of a wild thing. We need these volunteers who are mostly now entering their twilight years. And so how do we make sure in another generation and in the next generation, it's not only here, but it continues to grow and to thrive and to sustain itself? And the thing that I can say with certainty is that a lot of these core values and principles, a commitment to being in the open, working in the open, making sure nobody owns this thing, will never go away. And so then you have to say around those principles, what are the things you sort of have to adapt? And I feel really hopeful. I feel really hopeful that we're gonna figure it out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Maryana. I'm Billy Yang. I'm a PhD student in the School of Engineering doing
Awesome.
robotics. Thanks a lot for coming here. I have a question, not necessarily related to Wikipedia, but more along your own journey in nonprofit overall. I've personally been interested in a lot of these social problems of how do we actually go about changing them. I've thought about doing nonprofit, joining one, but then I have a lot of friends in nonprofit and tell me all about the problems of how, nonprofits generally don't have a lot of funding. They're usually sidelined in these policy discussions. They don't actually hold any real power in this space of policy making and engagement with the population. So I just want your view on that. How do we, if we actually want to make a difference, where does nonprofit actually stand in that whole space?
It's a great question. So I want to give you a two-part answer. The first is that, we were talking about this at lunch, is that my view is that the complexity of the problems that we face in societies across the world now, no one part of society can solve it. Like if government could just solve it on its own, I see that almost nowhere. If the private sector could just solve it on its own, I see that kind of almost nowhere. If that, kind of, let's call it the broader social sector where NGOs or other people. And I think this idea of how to think about becoming a multi-sector leader is really important, and not just focus on, I need to go work in a private sector organization, or I need to go work in an NGO environment. In fact, I think the more that you can think about, again, ways of learning and places to learn, and not so much what's the feature of the organization, I think the world will be better off if more of you had that kind of exposure. The second point that I want to make, even if your friends give you data to the contrary, is that like a well-run organization is a well-run organization. The reality is that what is measured in a private sector setting might be a profit bottom line, but every NGO that has to be a good one has to have a thing that it's measuring as excellence. Do you know what I mean? So I think this idea that some sectors have ways of working or funding or ways that feel like more, it's just nonsense. I mean, that's been certainly my lived experience. Because running an institution, an organization in a way that is high performing, where people do what they need to do, the forms of capital are different, and how those bottom line metrics are understood may be different. And I think that the value of spending time in more than one place is that hopefully you can also begin to see what can be more in common as opposed to what can feel more different, right? And a lot of people will say, well, I feel like I have to work in, this in finance or in management. Go do that, that's great, But try to figure out a way to maybe also land in a different kind of place, in a different kind of institution, so that you can help the world kind of connect the dots, if that makes sense. So maybe both is the answer.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you so much for being here to
Yeah.
speak with us today. My name is Matt, I'm an undergrad. I was wondering if you could expand a bit more on some of your specific goals and priorities for your tenure as the CEO of the Wikimedia Foundation, whether that is expanding Wikipedia's reach more, if that's even possible, or working on a more diversity of editors and perspectives, or just adding more content generally, whether that's using AI or like a lot of the problems you've been saying about getting more editors. I guess really in a nutshell, what are you excited about that you're working on right now?
Well, you could come work there. Those are all the priorities, so well done. I mean, actually, the problem is that there's so much to do. It's not about what needs to get done. It's how to prioritize against the resources that we have, And so I would say that I think about it in time frames. And so we have been introducing this language of creating a multi-generational strategy, because I don't feel worried about 5 years from now. I'm worried about 30 years from now. And a lot of that has to do with our editor population as they continue to age, and what is the kind of replacement rate, which is not the same, right? And so then, and again, most of those editors who joined Wikipedia in the early days were predominantly men in the global north, because they had internet access, free time, lots of things that they could have interest. So that was the general profile. And so I think the question of, again, who is going to be this next generation? And what are they interested in that's going to draw and attract them to Wikipedia? So that's the one. The second, which you've named exactly correctly, is what's the missing knowledge? And how do those gaps get filled? And again, because Wikipedia is not a social media platform where we go say what we think, we're trying to find a way to bring verified, citable sources. It requires citations about these different narratives in the world. So if I give you a concrete example, we launched a competition to try to encourage journalists on the African continent to submit pieces that they have written for more visibility to be cited on Wikipedia. Because of the content about Africa on Wikipedia, about 5% is written by Africans. And the young man who won the competition is a journalist who lives in Kenya. He was at the Associated Press, and he wrote a very powerful piece about kind of colonial history in Kenya from an alternate perspective. And because he wrote that piece, it can find its way, into the repository of human knowledge. And so a lot of what Wikipedia has to do actually is make sure that these other organs of society are healthy. Journalism, universities, research, so that that information can find its way for free, never to be charged for anybody who wants it. And so I think that's a second piece. And then the piece that is kind of more maybe less visible to the world is that we have to build a sustainable revenue model that ensures we never have to rely on ad revenue. This is never a thing owned by like 3 wealthy billionaires who like that. That is not the premise of what this is. And so trying to find a way that acknowledges that, again, page views might go down because less and less of us search the way that we used to search and end up on a page. And I don't think that the goal is to make people come to the page if they don't want to come to the page, right? Our goal is that we serve up information to you wherever you want it on the internet, right? And what most people don't understand is that pretty much anything you're looking up, they're getting it from Wikipedia. They don't tell you that. They don't tell you to come donate. And so we are experimenting with a different model that looks at how we can engage the large-scale reusers in a kind of different financial arrangement. I don't think that's a silver bullet that's going to solve the whole thing. And so being really thoughtful about the financial sustainability in perpetuity, which is what our mission calls for, in a way that's consistent with our core values, I would say is probably the third kind of big priority.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I'm a visiting undergrad studying molecular biology. And so just before coming to this talk, I kind of did a bit of a research on Wikipedia about you, yeah. And so I think my question is two parts. And the first part is I know that you got you study sociology during your undergrad, but you proceeded to do a master's in science, and then you got a JD. So I kind of just wondering, how did you decide which higher education that you want to pursue, because they're quite different disciplines.
Yes.
And my second part would be that how do you, because I know that you've worked at an accelerator for a long time, and now you're in this nonprofit. So just how do you pivot from industry to industry as well? Yeah.
I don't know if the dean or Holly are gonna not like my answer, but I mostly landed on some of my choices by eliminating a lot of other things, which is very different than knowing the thing, right? I think some of us are fortunate to come into this world having a very deep and clear passion for a thing, and then that makes life pretty easy. I know what I'm gonna study, I know what I'm gonna do, I know what job I'm gonna have. That was not the case for me, and I think that's not the case for a lot of people. And so if it's not clear what, then as I was saying earlier, how do you learn how to learn? So in the case of my undergraduate choice, I started in the sciences. I then realized I had a real interest in public policy and social science, so I started taking some classes in the environmental policy science space. And then really in my junior year, I just figured out I need to learn at that time how to write well, how to think critically, how to build my analytical skills, and that if I could figure out how to really master those, how to do those things, I could apply it to different. Now look, you can't do that and then decide you're going to, be an engineer 20 years later. So there are some trade-offs on some of the content, but that was really important. And so, my parents, who did not know what sociology was, and I said earlier, I took them to IHOP. We sat down. I said, I know this is going to not make sense, but I'm leaving the sciences and I'm going to go major in this thing called sociology. I just need you to trust me. Which they did, and I'm very grateful for that. And then my master's is, I received the Rhodes Scholarship, and so I went to Oxford to study for my master's, and it was a master's of science, but it was in social policy. And so that was the first, for me, opportunity to also recognize that, again, you have to think about how different disciplines can help animate the same problem in different ways. And one of the things that I think is so special about Yale, and is this is a place that you can mix and match so many different disciplines. We've got people here from the music school, we've got people here from, is that it's the opportunity to look at a problem from the eyes of like many different things, so that social science came into that. And then I promise you, I actually picked law school by eliminating all the other options. I had done management consulting at the associate level, so I was like, well, that's the post-MBA. What do I need an MBA for? I realized that for me personally, I didn't have a topic that I was going to spend 4 to 6 years getting a PhD, because that wasn't the thing that spoke to me. And law school at that point was extremely attractive for the same thing, is I think, and again, especially at Yale, analytical skills, critical thinking skills, leadership skills, writing skills. And so I came to Yale not sure I was ever going to practice law, and still went to law school, and I never took the bar. I mean, I did do the clerkship, so my parents kind of understood that. And so I think that what that did is it just gave me a lot of confidence that if you can continue to improve and master the how, you can change the what of the work that you do. And the reason that I just feel like that's so important is because information is changing so rapidly in the world, all of your fields, and in the world in which we live. And then maybe just the last thing to say is that I think I had the benefit early in my career of realizing that you can start a career and really go down the kind of mastery of a topic. And I think that the world needs that, right? We don't all have to become managers. And in fact, the world needs people who are subject matter experts beyond reproach in every field and everything they do. But I was lucky that I really loved the running of organizations and the management of people and running big teams. And so that was very helpful in then how I made a lot of my career choices after that. So even though the fields have changed, the kind of roles that I've played have been similar in the sense of taking an organization, either scaling it, or in this case, doing the things that we talked about to try to ensure that it sustains itself, for generations to come.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Hugo. I'm a graduate student, and my question is, what do you think are the differences between leading a profitable company and a non-profitable company like Wikimedia? And what characteristics are you looking for in search of your next generation leader?
Well, I mean, I'll just briefly maybe recap some of what I said before is, I'm not being naive that, of course, there are incentives that exist in capitalist structures around for-profit institutions that are, okay, we can park that. But what I think I'm trying to say is that at the end of the day, a leader wakes up and has to build good teams, have clear priorities, use resources in a way that matches what the needs are, be able to show results, be able to make sure that the organization's moving forward. And I think sometimes we get too wound up in a nonprofit doesn't do it that and they do something else, when I just don't think that's true. I think that's what the leaders of most types of organizations. The metrics are different, the sense of culture might be different, but I think that can And frankly, governments need to be more that way as well. I think that the, again, trying to encourage all of you to not make boxes where they don't exist. I have to be in this box because this is the thing I need to do, or I have to be in that box. That's, I think, again, some of the privilege of getting to be in an institution that gives you lots of pathways to explore and lots of ways to think about what could be your career, and that, you know, this next generation of leaders, in terms of what I'm seeing, is you have to be deeply curious, I think, about the world. You have to care, in my mind, about why things are the way that they are, because we've tried lots of ways of solving really big problems, and we're not winning. You know, we're not solving a lot of big problems. So why is it that these things persist? Why is it that inequality persists despite, you know, lots of investments and lots of people trying to do other things? And I think this, like, just being, like, relentless about curiosity around why, I think is a feature that I would say would help the world and, you know, in the leaders of this next generation. Here we go.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is James, and I'm an undergrad here studying ethnicity, race, and migration. And my question was just specifically about like the way of generating revenue that Wikipedia is currently using. And I'm just curious, like, I think it was like a little bit before you were there, but what your understanding is of how that came to be, like of that there being that like that banner that comes up that asks you to donate and gives you those statistics, and whether you think that's effective and how, if at all, it should change in the near future.
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is it is effective and it should not change in the near future. I think that there are definitely people who have the minor irritation for the period in which that banner is up, like, why do I need to look at this? But the consequence of that is that we have a model in which this is a public good that most people, in my mind, give because they get value from using Wikipedia. Everybody from all walks of life can donate because our average donation is somewhere between $10 and $12 times 8-9 million people, which is pretty remarkable for how, you know, most organizations are funded in this day and age. And I think that the independence, the non-reliance on ads, the ability for people to feel like they can be part of it is really, really important. And I think having people be a little bit irritated is an okay trade-off. It's an okay trade-off for that, because there isn't a better model in my mind if we want to stay a charitable nonprofit organization committed to free knowledge. We have started an endowment because different people like to give in different ways. And so for some donors who might be interested in more the long term and thinking about the perpetuity of the organization. So, you know, like most smart nonprofits, there's lots of different ways that people can manage. But the banners started because I honestly was like a group of volunteers. It was like crowdsourcing before there were all those sites. Like, we just need some people to give us some money to buy a server to put in somebody's closet. That's how it all started. That is literally one of our staff members, who's employee number 2, like ran Wikipedia out of his closet with a few servers for like 10 months before the organization, you know, was founded. And so that was just get everybody to kind of pitch in is where I think kind of the original idea was.
Great. So maybe one more and then to you, or yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Hi again.
Hi, thanks so much for speaking earlier. So my name's Sane, and I'm studying biomedical engineering. And what you said a lot about how people, the way that people are searching is changing. And like this year, I'm taking a lot of like humanities courses that I would have otherwise not. So it's really changing my relationship with like what is knowledge and what is learning and how do I learn. But I was just wondering, like, I feel like especially now I see this tension between people wanting the facts, but also people not caring about the facts. And so I was wondering how you think, what is the role of Wikimedia in changing that? Or maybe in sort of introducing, or like dealing with this new paradigm of knowledge and knowledge seeking? And how do you as a leader kind of think about what is knowledge and like the role that it plays in the world?
I mean, I think the fact that Wikipedia exists is a data point that we can all use, that there can be different models, if that makes sense, right? I find it hard to compare Wikipedia to social media platforms because the premise just is totally different, right? It is not a place for people to come share their opinions about things. It is something else. But when you meet with regulators and policymakers who we run the risk that we get regulated alongside the social media platforms because we are in kind of the Digital Services Act, which is an EU regulation, categorizes VLOPs, very large online platforms, that is literally your traffic, right? So we're a VLOP alongside all these other things that are very different than us. And so trying to help regulators and policymakers understand it can be a different way. This is a community moderated, we don't, the content moderation is done in a totally different way. And so maybe the role that we can play, not just for regulators and policymakers, but is like, it doesn't have to just be the way that people feel worried about where technology is heading. And that there can be spaces, because again, in practice, not in theory, there can be spaces where people who come with human motivations around altruism, who come with human motivations about curiosity and knowledge, who come with human motivations to contribute what they can to the world, can find a place and find their way online. Could that spin off other models and other ways of doing it? Well, there's one that exists, so we know it's possible. Maybe that gives us a sense of how to also hold on to, I think probably the last thing I want to say is this principle of being open, working in the open, showing your work. That has to be a feature, of the future of the web. And so I think holding on to that and continuing to ensure that others think about that we influence them, I think, in that way. And that's why I'm saying to you is the hard part about being a leader when there's a lot that needs to stay the same and a lot that needs to change is you have to be careful that you change the things that need to change and you keep the things the same that need to stay the same. And again, I feel optimistic about that because again, I often say that part of the reason I'm effective in my job is that I deeply understand how little power I have relative to our volunteers who are the main show. And they don't work for me, I work for them in the sense of what do these communities of volunteers and the collective wisdom of that tell us is going to be needed, I think, to do some of the things that you're talking about.
Well, I would like to just say that it gives me tremendous hope, the data point of the existence of Wikimedia and Wikipedia. And if you think about when you're searching for information on the web, how you feel when you get information from this source relative to how you feel when you get it from some other one where you're being marketed to or sold something or tried, directed in some way. There's some sort of sense of calm and peace that you have when you get information from what is just other folks like you trying to do something to convey it. So, I think academia should stand for the same thing. We try to emulate what you do. So I'm really grateful that you were able to join us, and let's give a round of applause. We also are continually grateful to be able to hold these events in this space, and so thank you to Sci-City and Claire for hosting us here, and thanks again to all of you for coming. We have some food out here for your enjoyment after the event.
Thank you for coming.
Cheers.
Yeah.